Hey, welcome to Legal AF with Court Accountability Action. I'm here today to talk with two of the most wonderful people in the world about what happened in Wisconsin and also other pushback against the forces that be. So as you all know, last night in Wisconsin, Elon Musk was defeated in his effort to buy the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the swing seat on that court. It was a 10-point difference, meaning 10% difference between the winner of that race and the loser of that race, who was heavily backed by Elon Musk, who not only injected more than $20 million into the race, but he also trotted out his Pennsylvania plan of having these so-called lotteries for people who signed petitions to support his candidate, Brad Schimmel, and gave away two $1 million checks to people who were closely tied to the Republican Party. So just more of this optics, more of this effort by one guy, the richest man in the world, to buy a Wisconsin Supreme Court seat after procuring for himself a co-presidency. So I am so excited to be joined today by two people who could not be better positioned to talk about this issue than my partner, Alex Aronson from Court Accountability Action, and my friend Molly Coleman from People's Parity Project, who was also involved in letting people know more about what was happening in Wisconsin in terms of the impact of this court on people's rights, on the economy, and so many other issues. So come on in, Alex and Molly, and join the conversation.
Thanks, Lisa. It's just an amazing turn of events. After 2 months of despondency and hopelessness and shock and awe, which of course continues, right? I think I don't want to put too much stock in what we've seen this week. This amazing. I was expecting this to be a late night in terms of finding out the result of that Wisconsin State Supreme Court election, but also Senator Cory Booker, breaking records, breaking Strom Thurmond's record, an anti-integration filibuster that Thurmond had given, and now we have a Booker, this powerful, incredibly compelling speaker with the endurance and inspiration to bulldoze through that record in defense of the people, right? It could not be more different from what Thurmond was filibustering on. So, we're starting to see this progress, this fight, this pushback. We've been talking about the hands-off events that are coming up this Saturday, April 5th. But at the same time, right, we're still in this very, very bad place. And it's going to be these outcomes, right? Things like the outcome of the state Supreme Court election in a state like Wisconsin, which could easily set the course for future, House majorities at the national level that decide whether the fights we are having, the incremental wins we are making now against this autocratic regime will have staying power, and I also think it reflects people's just utter rejection of the big money takeover of our political system, which is not a new thing, but which I think is coming into stark relief now. And Molly, like, you guys have been organizing at People's Parity Project against these forces of money in politics and for fair courts at the state level for years now, and they're coming to a head in these weeks here. How are you guys processing this? What were your efforts in the state of Wisconsin to kind of set this course for this incremental progress that we're starting to make?
Yeah, so I will echo the excitement and enthusiasm. After a very, very long 2 months, like you said, Alex, last night was such a big win and such an important win that will have so many ramifications for years and years to come, both in Wisconsin and throughout the country. So could not be more excited about last night's victory. We have for years now been looking at the composition of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, the lower courts in Wisconsin, and trying to understand what does it mean to have justices on the bench in Wisconsin who are committed to standing up for the rights of the people, not the powerful, wealthy corporate interests in the state. And I think what we saw in last night's election is that the people of Wisconsin understand that when it comes to electing state Supreme Court justices, that's an issue of, that's a pocketbook issue. It will impact what their rights are as working people, what their rights are as consumers. It will affect their basic freedoms, their ability to vote for, women and non-binary folks in the state of Wisconsin. It will affect what healthcare they're able to get. This is about absolutely every part of what life looks like throughout the state, and just could not be more excited about what has happened. I will, one thing I will add though is it's clear that the forces that we are fighting against, the authoritarians who do not want us to live in a democracy, they understand the stakes as well. Like you said, Elon Musk, over $20 million in this race. We had over nearly $100 million of spending in the race. People are fighting really hard to ensure that our democracy is distorted, to put it, distorted at best. They are working to suppress the vote. We also saw last night in Wisconsin the constitutionalization of voter suppression. That's incredibly alarming. So even on a really good night, we are seeing that they are continuing to chip away at our ability to control our own futures.
Yeah, that's right. In Wisconsin, in that race where Susan Crawford beat Brad Schemmel about 54% to 45% of the votes cast, with millions of votes cast in the state. There was also a ballot measure to add voter ID restrictions to the Wisconsin Constitution, and that passed also by a greater majority than the election was decided. That battle, really began in Wisconsin after Barack Obama was elected president. So there was a meeting of the American Legislative Exchange Council, which was in a meeting in a committee room that was helmed by the National Rifle Association, in which in 2009, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, decided to take up voter ID restrictions as a top priority. And Wisconsin jumped in right away after Scott Walker was elected and pushed through voter ID restrictions that made it harder for students to vote, but also really targeted, in its effect, Black citizens of Wisconsin, making it harder to vote, making it easy to vote if you had like a hunting license or a fishing license, but not if you had other forms of ID. And so unfortunately last night, that voter suppression measure was put in the Wisconsin Constitution, which means every time people go to vote here, they're going to have to show a non-expired driver's license or the alternative. But I will say, watching it here from inside Wisconsin and seeing the amount of money that Charles Koch was pouring into the race through, probably 6 or 7 huge postcards for Brad Schemmel attacking Susan Crawford, seeing more than a half dozen postcards from ordinary people writing as part of a postcard campaign to urge people to speak up and protect the fairness of the courts and support Susan Crawford. It was really something to behold. And then to see this flurry of $20 million by Elon Musk just in the few weeks before the election, which is more than any candidate themselves, typically raises. And as you point out, $100 million cumulatively on all sides over this one state Supreme Court race. The stakes are really high because it does affect people's rights. It does affect people's daily life. And in a certain sense, because of the gerrymandering, it really affects whether you can have representation in the legislature to protect your rights, to have policies to protect you and not just the billionaires in the state. So when Walker came into office, one of the things he did was put a sign at the border on the Wisconsin map saying Wisconsin is open for business. But last night, with that victory for Susan Crawford, the Wisconsin people said, but Wisconsin is not for sale. And so that was just, really exciting to behold, as a person, as an ordinary citizen. So I don't know, Alex, what are your thoughts on this?
Since we have Molly here, Molly and, People's Parity Project and Court Accountability Action do so much kind of, thinking together about big challenges in terms of constitutional power allocation, how to get more constitutional power kind of at the federal level back in the hands of the people, away from these courts. What this conversation is making me think about is the extent to which we're now seeing the kind of big political fights coming to bear at the state level through, in this case, elected judgeships. And, I wouldn't say that, the process we have at the federal level for presidential appointment and Senate confirmation has, prevented the infection of the judicial process by politics. Clearly it hasn't, right? We spent so much time talking about the huge decades-long dark money apparatus that had been brought to bear at the courts. But here it's kind of like right out in the open. The money's pouring in, not just, on one side, on both sides, certainly dominated by this expenditure from Musk. But, Molly, you do state Supreme Court work all across the country. How do you think about these questions of power and politics vis-a-vis courts? And where do we go from here now that the courts are very clearly such a central, playing field for the resolution of such important policy questions in our country.
There are so many different threads here. A couple of things that I want to say. One thing that is so interesting about the Wisconsin race is how virtually every hot button political issue that has come up in Wisconsin in the last 15 years, really since Scott Walker was elected governor, is now coming to the courts, right? So we had Act 10 enacted by Scott Walker in 2011 to decimate public sector unions. That is an issue that is coming to the state Supreme Court likely in the next year. We have abortion that has been litigated at the Supreme Court. We're waiting on a decision this spring. Voting rights, as we've already touched on, voter suppression, voter ID, all of these issues have been massive political battles in a very closely divided state. All of these issues are now coming to the court. And so I think that it's not surprising that the stakes have gotten this high. I think it's important to note in this conversation, Elon Musk spending $20 million in this race. Prior to 2023, the most money that had ever been spent in a state Supreme Court race, in an entire race, not just on behalf of one candidate, was $15 million. In 2023, in the last Wisconsin state Supreme Court race, a new spending record was set, $51 million. Now, here we are 2 years later, $100 million. This is not working, right? We are so lucky that with the results of last night's election, we have a chance that the Wisconsin State Supreme Court is going to stand up for democracy, is going to stand up for voters. But we also see how the system as we have it right now is actually destroying our democracy. You should not need to spend $100 million in a state Supreme Court race. Billionaires should not be able to buy or attempt to buy these elections, either directly, like Musk did, or indirectly. And I will say, I'm based in Minnesota. We're sitting here looking across the border and saying, how do we make sure that we don't have that happen here? We don't want our state Supreme Court elections to all of a sudden be ratcheting up in this way. There's been I think that this question of what is the right way, what is the democratically legitimate way to select judges, what is the right way to ensure the independence of our judiciary is so complicated. For a long time, folks have kind of held up merit selection commissions, which some states use as the best way to select judges. I will say part of me is like, well, at least folks in Wisconsin knew what the stakes were, right? We weren't hiding behind this guise of what is the best method of judicial interpretation? And is this an originalist judge? No, we actually were talking about the real issues that these justices will be deciding. But I don't have the answers, but I think that we can pretty safely say that the system is not working, and we need to be, I think, willing to really have some deep, honest, hard conversations about what does it look like at both the federal level and the state level to build functioning judiciaries.
Yeah, I really appreciate your point on the escalation too, Molly, because that the price increase for Wisconsin or for a state Supreme Court race now has just gone through the roof, making it into a contest where a billionaire like Elon Musk can have even more impact. $20 million to him is probably the equivalent of I don't know, is it a couple steak dinners or something at this point, since he's the richest man in the world? What is $20 million to him compared to what anyone else has in their pocket? But it's also the case that this issue, what happened in Wisconsin, is in some ways proof of the utter failure of the U.S. Supreme Court in that Citizens United decision, that decision where John Roberts asked Anthony Kennedy to write an opinion in which he claimed that this outside money is of no value, little or no value to candidates unless it's coordinated, little or no value, and that somehow our First Amendment had to be reinterpreted, engrafted with this notion that people could spend unlimited money in our elections and distort those elections outside of the campaign finance structure, which, as you know, Molly, Scott Walker, assailed in Wisconsin, took down public financing of Supreme Court elections. But even with public financing of Supreme Court elections, maybe that would be $1 million for each candidate. That's nothing compared to this outside money, which is why Alex's point about what happened in Maine, I think, is so important, that there is a rising up among people to say, we do not want this kind of money polluting our elections. We do not want this kind of money distorting our elections. And obviously, in the vote last night, 55% of the people in Wisconsin, did stand up to reject Musk's efforts to buy that election, in addition to voting on other values, as you point out. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I want to just touch on another really key part of your work, Molly, which is the amazing work the People's Parity Project does organizing law students and lawyers. And Alex and I have been watching this scenario unfold with some of these big firms just capitulating to Trump and promising $100 million in pro bono in order to get off the hook from his really outlandish, outrageous bullying, and other firms really standing up and saying no, like Perkins Coie and others saying, we are not going to cave into this bully. We've seen resignations from the firms of people, lawyers who say they don't want to work for Skadden, for example, because they caved into Trump. And I'm sure we're seeing organizing on campus that you are probably part of. Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, definitely. We have been so inspired by some of the lawyers who have been standing up in this moment. Like you said, the lawyers at Skadden, at some of these firms who have been willing to say, my career trajectory that I was on is not worth being a part of this firm that is doing $100 million worth of legal work for this administration that so clearly does not care about the rule of law, is so clearly interested in trampling all of our democracy. So I've been so inspired by the bravery and the courage of some of the younger associates at these firms. I will say one thing that we are paying attention to quite closely is the fact that we haven't seen the same bravery from partners at law firms, from the people who have the most political, social, financial power at these firms. They don't seem to have the same problem with it. And I think that that is really concerning. The other thing that we are really keenly aware of is that the firms that are caving right now, the Skaddens, the Paul Weisses, today Milbank, they're doing that when the spotlight is shining on this issue and shining on these firms as brightly as it is ever going to. This is headline news across the country, and they are still caving to the administration. So we are extremely concerned about what's going to happen when the news cycle moves on. And these firms, what are they going to do to curry favor with this administration when they think that they can get away with it without the same public scrutiny? So we're working to build out lasting organizing power that will commit to holding the legal profession accountable, not just today, tomorrow, next month, but throughout the duration of this administration, whether that's 3.5 more years or 7.5 more years, as apparently Trump is floating. Really incredibly terrifying, right? Though, this is what they are talking about. This is what they are seriously, evidently pursuing. And so we need organized lawyers who are committed to standing up to this authoritarian. We've just seen such an outpouring, I will say, an outpouring like we've never seen of grassroots energy on law school campuses amongst practicing lawyers, both those who are kind of in the fight on a day-to-day basis litigating against this administration, but also the folks who are in totally different lines of legal work, but who are willing to stand up and say, enough is enough. We have to defend the rule of law, and that means pushing back on this administration.
Alex, you were in big law. Is there anything you want to add before you wrap us and take us out?
Sure. I mean, these big law spaces are not, they're not used to engaging in these types of fights, right? They keep their heads down and they make money for their corporate clients, and they, maybe do some pro bono work on the side. But they also, are composed of people, right? Lawyers that have values of their own, that many of whom have real fundamental commitments to the rule of law. They went to law school for a reason, not to, presumably most of them didn't just go to make money. And so I think they find themselves at a really important crossroads. And, I think down to a person at those firms, not everybody is in a position to quit their job immediately. The job market right now for lawyers, it's not exactly like there's a ton of them out there. All these government lawyers are, basically getting axed. And so, everybody is in their own unique position vis-a-vis their family, vis-a-vis their, law school debt. But I think everybody has an obligation at a moment of rising, actually pretty severe, urgent autocracy and democratic decline in this country to, find whatever they can muster to be part of the response, to be part of the defense of the rule of law, the defense of what remains of the legal profession. If this continues, I think there will not be much left to save for the legal profession. This is the moment, and I think it's about as simple as that.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary. You and I have talked about, like, what are con law teachers even teaching going to be able to teach now, given what's happened to the Constitution? But it's across all areas of law in terms of whether we will have this system or not with these attacks on civil society. So, Molly, thank you so much for coming on. Alex, always a joy to be on here with you at Legal AF and the Midas Touch Network. Signing off, and thank you all for joining us.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.